So I need to start with the practical part of this, because if I skip it, the whole thing falls apart. The practical part is, I have the pay stubs. I have them in a folder in my filing cabinet right now. 8 months of pay stubs from a job that, according to every public record I have since been able to locate, did not exist when I worked it. I want you to understand that I'm not asking you to take my word for something intangible. I have paper documentation of a salary paid to me by an institution that the historical record says had been closed for over a decade before I walked through its doors. The pay stubs are real. The job was real. The library was real. What it was doing, still open when it was supposed to have been closed for years, is the part I have spent a long time trying to understand. Let me back up. I moved to a new city for graduate school in my mid-20s. New place, didn't know many people yet, needed part-time work to supplement my stipend, the way grad students perpetually need part-time work. I was looking for something that would fit around my class schedule, preferably something quiet and conducive to the kind of mental state that academic work requires. Library work was the obvious answer. I'd worked in my undergraduate library and liked it. The particular quiet of it, the organizational logic of it, the way a well-run library has a quality of purposefulness that other environments don't. I found the listing on a physical bulletin board in the graduate student lounge, which I mentioned because it matters to the story and because it tells you something about the era. This was before everything was online, before you'd have searched for a job on your phone without thinking about it. Things were still posted on actual paper on actual bulletin boards, and you'd tear off a phone number tab at the bottom. I tore off the tab. The listing said part-time library assistant, flexible hours, competitive pay, inquire within, and gave an address in a neighborhood about a mile from campus. I walked over there that same afternoon. The neighborhood was one of those older city neighborhoods that had been built up in the early 20th century and had gone through various phases since, prosperous then less so, then in the process of being gently reclaimed, the way certain city neighborhoods are reclaimed when universities expand their gravity and young people start moving in. Old brick buildings, mature trees, the particular smell of a place that has been inhabited for a long time and has accumulated the quiet dignity of that. The address I was looking for was a 2-story building set back from the sidewalk, brick, with wide front steps and a set of double doors with long vertical windows in them, and a sign beside the doors that said Hartwell Branch Library and brass letters that had been there long enough to develop a beautiful patina. The doors were unlocked. I went in. The interior was what a library of that era and that building style looked like: high ceilings, tall windows that let in long rectangles of afternoon light, the smell of old paper and wood polish that is the specific olfactory signature of a library that has been a library for a long time, dark wood shelving, card catalogs along one wall, actual card catalogs, which even then were becoming rare, reading tables with green-shaded lamps, a circulation desk in the center of the main room, staffed by a woman who I'd guess was in her 60s, silver hair pulled back, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, the kind of person who looked as though she had been at that desk for decades and had organized herself to remain there indefinitely. Her name was Mrs. Albright. She looked up when I came in, assessed me briefly in the way librarians assess people who walk through their doors, and asked if she could help me. I said I'd seen the job posting. She said, "Good, we need the help," and asked me to sit down. The interview was brief and practical. She asked about my experience with library systems, with cataloging, with the kind of organizational tasks that library work involves. I answered. She seemed satisfied. She offered me the position at a rate that was, as advertised, competitive, and asked when I could start. I said Monday, and she said fine, and I filled out some paperwork she produced from a desk drawer, and that was that. I walked out with a job. I worked at Hartwell Branch Library for 8 months, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday afternoons, sometimes Saturday mornings, 4 to 5 hours a shift. The work was exactly what library work is: shelving returns, helping patrons locate things, maintaining the catalog, the quiet, ongoing administrative labor of keeping a collection organized and accessible. Mrs. Albright was a good employer in the way that people who have been doing something for a long time and doing it well are good at overseeing others doing the same thing: clear, patient, uninterested in drama, entirely focused on the work. The library had a small but dedicated patronage. Not a busy place, it was a branch library in a residential neighborhood, not a main branch, and the foot traffic was modest. But the people who came regularly, and there was a quality of relationship between the regulars and the collection that I found moving in the way that a genuine reader's relationship to a library is always moving. An older man who came every Tuesday and Thursday and sat at the same reading table with the same green-shaded lamp and worked through the history section shelf by shelf with the systematic pleasure of someone with a long project and all the time they need for it. A woman who brought her daughter on Saturday mornings for the children's section, the daughter young enough that the library still had the quality of magic for her, the shelves still tall enough to be slightly overwhelming, a few students who used the reading tables to work in silence. Mrs. Albright knew all of them by name. She knew what they were reading and what they'd read before, and what she should set aside for them when something came in that she thought they'd want. This is what good librarians do, and she did it with the ease of long practice. About 3 months in, I started noticing small things that I filed away without quite knowing what to do with them. The first thing was the books. The collection at Hartwell was weighted heavily toward older material. This wasn't unusual for a small branch library with a limited acquisitions budget. Older books don't circulate out and they stay on the shelves, but the weight was more pronounced than I'd have expected. The newest books in the collection, as I worked through the shelving and familiarizing myself with the stacks, were from the mid-'80s. Not a few of them, all of them. Nothing newer than 1986, not in any section, not in the periodicals, not in the reference materials. The magazines in the periodical section ran through 1986 and then stopped, a collection that ended, comprehensively, in 1986. I mentioned this to Mrs. Albright once, casually said it seemed like the new acquisitions budget must be pretty tight if we weren't getting anything more recent than the mid-'80s. She looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "We have what we have, and what we have serves the people who come here," which was not quite an answer, but had the quality of a closed subject, and I let it go. The second thing was the card catalog. I'd been trained on a computer system at my undergraduate library, and when I started at Hartwell, I'd asked about the database, and Mrs. Albright had said they used the card catalog, gesturing toward the long oak cabinets along the wall, as though this required no further explanation, which it did, but again, closed subject energy, so I learned the card catalog. And the card catalog was impeccable, organized, maintained, every entry in order, the cards themselves in perfect condition given their age, but the entries stopped in 1986. No new cards after 1986, a catalog that had simply ceased to grow at a specific point and had been maintained in perfect stasis ever since. It was a quality of the building itself, of the air inside it, that I noticed more on some days than others. On quiet afternoons with good light through the tall windows, it wasn't something I was aware of. But on gray days, on days when the light was low and the building was very still and there weren't many patrons, there was something about the atmosphere that was, I want to find the right word and I'm going to settle on suspended. Like the building was not quite fully in the present moment, like it was occupying a moment slightly to the side of the one I was occupying, adjacent to now rather than in it. I was aware of being in a place that was very settled and very still, and that had a different relationship to time than the street outside. I never felt uncomfortable there. I want to say that clearly. Whatever was unusual about Hartwell Branch Library, it was not threatening or distressing. It was one of the most peaceful places I have ever worked. The quality of suspendedness, when I was aware of it, felt gentle rather than sinister, like a place that had found a way to hold still inside the current of things and was content to do so. I left the job when my second year of graduate school got too demanding to maintain the hours. I gave Mrs. Albright 2 weeks' notice, and she thanked me for my work and gave me a firm handshake, and that was the end of it. I walked out of Hartwell Branch Library on a Friday afternoon in May and took the long way home through the neighborhood and didn't think about anything in particular, just the pleasant tiredness of a completed thing. About a year later, cleaning out a box of papers, I found my pay stubs from Hartwell, and I did what you do when you find documentation of an old job. I glanced at them, thought briefly about the place. and was about to put them back in the box when something snagged my attention. It was the name at the top of the pay stub. The institutional name, Hartwell Branch Library, and below it a branch identifier number and a parent organization identifier, a city library system designation. I looked at the designation, then I looked it up. The way you look things up when something snags your attention. Just a casual check. I found the city library system's historical records. Looked up the branch identifier number. Hartwell Branch Library, according to the records, had closed in 1987. Budget cuts, the record said. The building had been subsequently sold to a private owner and converted to residential use in 1992. The branch had been closed for over a decade before I'd walked in and been hired and spent 8 months shelving books and helping patrons and learning the card catalog. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Then I did more research. I found a local historical archive that had photos. The building in the photos, the same 2-story brick building, the same wide front steps, the same double doors, was photographed in the early 90s, clearly residential, with window boxes and a different door and no brass sign beside it, converted, exactly as the record said, to apartments. Had been apartments for years by the time I supposedly worked there. I drove to the address. The building was there. Apartments had been apartments from the look of it and the evidence of the historical record for a long time. No library, no brass sign, no Mrs. Albright at a circulation desk, just a residential building with a buzzer panel and names beside the buttons and someone's bicycle locked to the front railing. I have the pay stubs. I have 8 months of them. The institutional designation on them matches the historical records for a library that was closed before I was born, almost. The address is a building that has been apartments for decades. I've thought about this for years. I've thought about it carefully, and I've thought about it at 3 in the morning when careful thinking isn't available. And all you have is the feeling of the thing. I've thought about what it means that I worked somewhere that wasn't there, that I was paid by something that wasn't operating, that I learned a card catalog that stopped growing in 1986 and was maintained in perfect condition by a woman named Mrs. Albright who knew all her regulars by name and what they were reading. I've thought about those regulars. The older man working through the history section, shelf by shelf, with all the time he needed. The woman with her daughter on Saturday mornings. I've thought about what they were, what all of us were, existing in that suspended space together, whether we were all the same kind of thing or different kinds of things that had found the same pocket in time and occupied it quietly together. I've thought about Mrs. Albright. Her silver hair and her reading glasses on their chain and the way she managed that collection with the care of someone who had given their life to a thing and intended to keep giving it. I hope she's still there, in whatever way she's there. I hope the tall windows are still letting in rectangles of afternoon light and the green shaded lamps are still on at the reading tables and the card catalog is still organized and perfect and the patrons who need it are still finding their way through the double doors. I kept the pay stubs. I keep them in a folder in my filing cabinet, and every once in a while I take them out and look at them. The institutional letterhead, the branch identifier, the careful accounting of hours worked and wages paid. Proof of something. Not proof that I can show anyone and have them immediately understand, but proof in the private way that certain things are proof. The record of 8 months in a place that wasn't there, doing work that needed doing, in a library that had found a way to keep being a library even after the city had closed it and sold the building and moved on. Some things, I think, don't close just because you close them. Some things just keep going, quiet and purposeful and full of light through tall windows, for as long as they're needed. Sleep well. I hope wherever you are feels as peaceful as that library did on a good afternoon with the light coming in, right, and a book open in your hands and nothing required of you except to be there. That's enough. That's always been enough.